Hello everybody, from the Loyal Jones Appalachian Center at Berea College, this is Head of the Holler. Today I'm joined by a great artist, Pat Banks, who lives in Richmond, Kentucky, and many of you will no doubt know Pat's beautiful watercolors. I'm always surprised when I, in places around the Commonwealth, and I see a nice piece of watercolor art and I look and it's by Pat Banks, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers will recognize your art. But we're also here to talk to Pat today about her environmental activism and especially her concern for the Kentucky River. So Pat, welcome to Head of the Holler. It's really a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, I was going to ask you about your art, and then I was going to ask you later about your environmental activism, but you told me it was hard to separate those two. So say more about that for us.
Well, I think that I'm learning to articulate it a little bit better, but I think we compartmentalize our lives so much and things are very separate. Our art is separated from our science. People are not connected to their water, their river. It isn't part of their job. Everything is disconnected. And as an artist, it's really hard for me to disconnect things because I'm a networker. I'm always looking at a larger canvas or a larger thing and how things fit together. And so as an environmentalist, it's very natural for me to pull my art into that and also have my art informed by some of the environmental concerns that we have.
Well, now I know you grew up in Indiana along the Ohio River, and as we were talking beforehand, you mentioned the Cuyahoga River catching on fire. This was during the time of the Santa Barbara oil spill, early 70s, and that time really conditioned our, I think, our mindfulness about the environment. So today we may not have rivers catching on fire, but we sure do have oil spills. And so I'm wondering, are we better off? Are we worse off? Are we not very mindful about the conditions of our watersheds today? Could you tell us a little bit?
Well, it's my impression. I feel like a lot of people are disconnected from their environment, period. You know, whether it's the watershed, the land, or their water. I would hazard a guess that if you talk to most of the people walking down the street in Lexington, they might not realize we have a river running through. So if you have people that are disconnected with the Kentucky River and they really don't think that their water comes from there, comes from a faucet. And they also, I think people feel on one level very complacent because we had those environmental disasters, so we have the EPA, which is always considered a bad guy because they're shutting business down and enforcing all of these rules. And it's like, have people forgotten that these rules were made to maybe make our environment better? The Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act, we were supposed to have it all taken care of by 1985. Well, this is 2010, and we have fish advisories out. And when I'm being interviewed by a reporter or something, since I'm not a scientist, I rely on doing a little research and trying to be informed. I think it's really important for citizens to be informed. And so hopefully I'll inspire people out here that might have more knowledge than I do, that they actually use it.
Tell us about some of the specific things that should be of concern to us in the watershed.
Well, one thing that really speaks to me is that we have fish advisories. And I'm sure people have heard of some of the fish advisories. Eat so much fish here. Because of the heavy metals, you might have to limit your intake of fish one place or another. But if you go on the national EPA, the United States EPA website, and type in fish advisories, you will get information about what's contaminated. And what you'll find out is that I believe 95% of the water in the United States has fish advisories, mostly for mercury and heavy metals. We also have quite a few PCBs and then other local issues depending on what industry might be around. And so these industries are technically not illegal because they have permits to pollute. And so I'm starting to think that some of these laws might not be strict enough. Because why should, let me read a little thing here. This is from the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife website. Fish consumption advisories are in effect for the following. Statewide, all waters are under advisory for mercury. Women of childbearing age, children 6 years of age and younger should eat no more than 1 meal per week of freshwater fish. Adult men and women are not included in this consumption notice. I think that is so significant that people ought to be really upset. When I get my press packets together, when I'm doing an interview, I will usually include a fish consumption notice listing, of course, all of the fish that, you know, how many times you should eat it or not. And I had one reporter ask me where I got that information. And when I said it was off the EPA website, she was shocked. And she said, but if it affects all young women and young children and it's in all of our water, the fish, the mercury's in all of our water and it affects the fish, she said, why aren't people upset? And I said, well, it's public knowledge, and people should know about it. They should care about it, but a lot of people haven't made those connections.
Which is why you're here. You know, I remember, Pat, as a kid, we'd be driving to Chicago or something, we'd go through Gary. And I remember it used to be one of those things where anticipating the big steel mills with all the smoke and pollution coming out, and it was acrid, stinky smell, and we would roll up the windows days before air conditioning. Well, now you drive through Gary and you don't see that, you don't smell that anymore. I think pollution today is much more blind to people than it might have been 25 or 30 or 40 years ago. So where is this mercury coming from?
Well, some of that industry we've lost. Many people and scientists link the coal-fired power plants and automobiles. Now, with the changes with automobiles, those pollutions have really been reduced because, and that's been significant. All the new power plants have an incredible, they make incredible progress. We've grandfathered in some of the dirtiest power plants, and many of them are so lucrative, and they make so much money. There's no retirement date set in those grandfather clauses. And
one of those is right close.
Yes, as a matter of fact, in Ford, Kentucky, the Dale plant is one of the dirtiest plants in the country, I believe.
And technically that's in Clark County?
Yes.
Clark County.
And it's just a couple of miles from Boonesboro State Park. We live a couple of miles from it in the River Valley up on a ridge. I did offer the Division of Air to come and put a monitoring station up at our place, but they thought it might be too expensive. But we have a black coating that lands on white furniture that I think is pretty interesting. And a couple of years ago, the Herald Leader reported that the Dale plant was fined a significant amount of money, one of the largest fines ever levied on a coal-fired plant because they had exceeded their emissions at that time. I've been told they are in compliance, but at the time they had, they're allowed to emit tons of heavy metals into the air legally. But they had actually, can you imagine? I can't imagine a ton of anything in the air. And so to imagine a few hundred extra tons of things in the air, I just can't, that's hard for me to imagine, that's okay.
And a lot of work I know is going on to become more engaged with the notion of a new coal-fired plant, the Smith plant, that's being discussed.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, I know a little bit about it, and I've gone to a couple of public meetings. These are very nice people, And they were explaining the new Smith plant, how clean it would be. And everything I've read, it's like it's 95% cleaner for one emission, 98% cleaner than another emission, because there's a whole list of things that they're monitoring. And when I asked the man who was presenting, okay, so if we start with this point, if where we're starting from, and the Smith plant is 95% cleaner, where does the Dale plant fit in this line? Because I'm thinking, like, where's it going to be? And he said, I didn't understand because the Dale plant is in compliance. And they all, I've been assured that they are in compliance. So, but my question was just trying to, for me, visualize, well, where is this, where does the Dale plant fit? And he said it's not on there because the Dale plant was grandfathered in before any, so the plants they're comparing the new plant with, the Dale plant's over here somewhere.
It's off the charts.
Yeah, so I don't know the details, and I have no numbers to go with that, but visualizing it, I thought that was pretty amazing. And
so how did you, tell us how you became involved in Kentucky RiverKeeper?
Bobby Kennedy Jr. came and spoke on campus in 2000.
At Eastern Kentucky
At
University?
Eastern Kentucky University, yes. And he spoke several times, and much of his, he spoke on a lot of different subjects, but everything always came back to water. And we thought, wow, what can we do? So he invited us to Malibu, and we went to Malibu to one of the very first Waterkeeper Alliance meetings. And there were only about 30 waterkeepers across the country, the Hudson River Keeper and some of the coast keepers. And this got set up as modeled after the Pace Law School that Bobby Kennedy runs. And so it's like a university as a model, because a lot of these are not university-based. So, and the Kentucky RiverKeeper is a 501c3 nonprofit or separate organization. But we were told at the time by the president at that time that good science and good law is what's important. And so we try to keep that in mind. So the Kentucky RiverKeeper was born. We've had some very active boards and incredible people that really care.
This is a great waterway. I mean, the beauty of it, the culture, the river culture, when you get down to it, you feel like you're kind of in a different place with the boats and the marinas and the fishermen. Mm-hmm. And it's really an amazing, I think, feature of our Commonwealth that really begins and ends within the Commonwealth, if you think about it. And it's worth preserving, I think. Well,
and it's almost like a really best-kept secret, because unless you're part of that river culture, you don't know it's there. And we have started a couple of projects to try and work. We call it the big idea, because we're not trying to save the river from one thing. We're trying to look at the whole river, and we're trying to approach solving the problems through art and storytelling and science and education. We're just trying to, we're throwing a lot of different balls at it, but there's like some unique places on the river, and I think it's still so beautiful when you are paddling down the river or boating down the river. What you see are palisades and caves, little creeks, trees everywhere, and probably because it's so rugged, the landscape, and fairly remote, if we can preserve this place now, it will definitely be a treasure for the whole country.
I have a good friend who is a writer. He's a creative nonfiction writer, and he's written a book about paddling the length of the Tennessee River. And then he wrote another book called Cold-Hearted River, which is about his paddling the Cumberland River.
Wow.
And it's such a great book and a fascinating read about environmental, cultural history, modern day life. And it just struck me, it would be great for him to write a book about the Kentucky as well.
If he will come up here, we'll just take him out.
Yeah.
Yes.
What would you most like to see happen? What about regarding the Kentucky River?
Well, again, we don't have just one thing, because I think we need to enforce our environmental laws as much as we can. Most of the permits that are given are substantial. I mean, there's a lot of pollution that's allowed, and I think that's a misconception. Most people think that there's all these rules that people can't pollute, but they actually have a license to pollute. And I would like to see these industries have to clean the water up more before it gets put back into our system. If that's the real cost of doing business, then they need to absorb that cost. We have a blue water trail that we're getting started. We got a small grant from the Kentucky River Authority to start. It's called a blue waterway. And since we have 14 locks and dams, we don't have a wild river, but and it is for drinking water, so it's probably always going to have locks and dams, or at least the dams. And we have one section that we're going to start with, and this is going to be linked to the national park systems, and you build partnerships, and you create maps and brochures, and you put the histories and the if there's archaeological sites or anything that you can do to help raise awareness of that river, and this would bring kayakers and canoers to the water. There are some people we're hoping to partnership as far as preserving the riparian zones, and also, again, the riparian zones are not something that are enforced so much, but when you look at the last flood we had, it is important to really be thinking about these.
The last flood in May.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And so when you have as many trees as possible lining your rivers and creeks, I think the riparian zones vary depending on where you are, but just having 50 to 100 feet that would just be trees. You have a lot. You keep your water clear. You keep the water temperature cooler so that the fish and the plants and things can survive. And
I know when I lived in East Tennessee, as a gardener, I'd always loved those summer rains. Summer big soaking rains, big thunderstorms. But then I read a book by John Nolt called What Have We Done?, which was an environmental history of East Tennessee. And I realized when we got those big soaking rains that sewage treatment plants would be forced most commonly to just open up and release untreated sewage into the Tennessee River.
The Kentucky gets quite a bit of that. I believe Lexington has about 4 years to correct theirs. Richmond and Winchester, and I believe Irvin are all working on new plants.
I think we hear a lot in Appalachian studies and in the media about what we're doing to the water in Appalachia. In some ways, people liken it to America's rainforest, and in so many places you can't drink the water for a number of reasons. But I think sometimes we forget the most obvious thing in the region, which is, headwater sources for so many rivers and streams, and the Kentucky River seems just foremost among that. Here we are in almost a rainforest, and we've poisoned the water and damaged the water in that watershed. And
we permit practices that are not really healthy for the whole system. Again, we separate what's good for business, and that becomes the bottom line. And maybe I want to see a real social change, but I think the bottom line needs to have social, context, and environmental. I heard something interesting the other day, and this is kind of in this context, talking about how corporations are listed as people when it comes to law, and the environment isn't. So you can degrade the environment, and there's not an entity that is the environment. It's like in our minds, it's like, well, you know, we have dominion, so we can do what we want to, just if we agree. But especially if it's private, then you can do what you want to. And it's like we've lost that sense of stewardship, I think, and I think we need to build that because we want this river for our grandchildren. I have a neighbor who has 2 young children, and her and her family live along the river and have had their farms in this area for generations. And fishing and hunting is it's a family time together, and they rely on the fish and the game that they catch. And she was shocked.
That tradition, aren't we?
Well, she was shocked because I was working on one of my presentations, and she saw the fish consumption advisory, and it took her so by surprise because here her children are fishing with her father, and they have to be careful about the fish that they eat. How is that possible? How do we let our environment get so degraded that the weakest people are so threatened?
Yeah.
But we are all threatened. You know, when we can disconnect from, when everyone can sit around and not feel connected to the water or what happens on the land, they think, well, it happened over there, not here. Then when you separate that, then you really aren't paying attention.
And that's one of the most powerful things about the notion that we all live downstream.
We all live downstream.
It's really a powerful thought to consider. Well, Pat, you've brought me this little postcard of one of your most recent paintings. We've just got a few minutes left, but talk about then how your art has come back around to this environmental activism.
Well, I've pulled together some wonderful friends, and they've helped so much other artists who have always wanted to have their art influence and speak to some of their concerns. And so we formed a group called Shaped by Water. We're 10 years now, and we've been getting small grants to pull people together. And we just had a show that has traveled from Richmond to from the Gallery on Main to Lex Arts in Lexington. And we received an Eco Arts grant from the Fayette County Urban League and Lex Arts for Shaped by Water to take it into the school, take some of the artists into the schools. But the Shaped by Water idea is to link art and science. Because they've been separated, even in the schools, it's like, oh, well, we can't teach art because we're going to teach math or we're going to teach science. And it's like, how people separate it is beyond me because art is so linked to all of these disciplines. And when you're able to communicate on multiple levels, it's really more powerful. And so if we can link scientists with their credible information and artists and put them back together so that artists can be informed citizens and credible, and also science can be more effective because it links it to its traditions.
Yeah.
These
it's a
things
win-win situation.
Yes, the bachelor's degree of arts and science really did link those things, and for them to just be separated in the last couple hundred years, people think that's how it's always been, and as an artist, I have to say that the 1950s buildings that were little square boxes lack some of the beauty that some of the buildings that were built for people.
Yeah. Well, Pat, I really want to thank you for being on Head of the Holler today, and I thank you for your art. I love your paintings, and I really admire what you and the Kentucky RiverKeeper organization is doing to protect this most valuable resource that we have here.
Thank you
very much. And as always, I want to thank you all for tuning in today, and we will leave you with some more sounds from the Berea College Bluegrass Band. Thanks again.